I'm going to give a taster lecture now on the topic applying sociolinguistic knowledge. And the reason that I've chosen that topic is that one of the really important parts of studying English language at Leeds is that we want students to be able to apply the knowledge they acquire here to real life language issues. So we want them to develop the ability to think critically about what is written in the media, for example, and to be able to participate in public debates. So in this short taster lecture, I want to give an example of this. And in doing that, I'm going to address this specific question: should schools ban the use of local dialect speech in the classroom? Because actually this is a question that occurs quite often in educational debate, and it's often reported on in the national media. So it's a contemporary issue, although it does have a really long historical context too. And in responding to this question, I'm going to be drawing on some of the research and the kinds of materials that we would cover in the second year core module, Language in Society. Before I get to that particular example, I'll introduce myself. So I'm Dr. Julia Snell. I'm Associate Professor in English Language in the School of English at the University of Leeds. In terms of my research interests and expertise, I'm a sociolinguist, and what that means is that I'm interested in the role that language plays in social life, and this encompasses all kinds of things. But to give you an example, I think about how language is implicated in the construction of identity categories like social class, gender, ethnicity, its relationships to power and ideology, and also the way it functions in social institutions such as education. Now, some of my research in these areas will be relevant to the case study that we're about to look at, which is why I'm mentioning them now. But without further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to take you back to an article that was widely reported on in national newspapers back in February 2013. And the story was that the head teacher of a primary school in Teesside in the northeast of England had banned the use of spoken Teesside dialect forms in the classroom and had written to her pupils' parents to ask that they do the same at home. The stated reason for this move was the need to give the working class pupils involved the best possible chance of educational and then later career success, which for this head teacher meant eradicating 11 so-called incorrect words, phrases and pronunciations from the children's speech. So what you can see on screen is an excerpt from that letter. So this is what was sent home to parents in Teesside. And the table shows these 11 different language features. On the left-hand side, those that the school is banning, saying that they're incorrect, and then on the right-hand side, we've got the so-called correct alternatives. Now, this Teesside story is by no means unique. Similar reports have emerged based on the actions of schools elsewhere in the UK. So, for example, in Sheffield, so the headline from the newspapers here was that this school was banning slang and asking them to speak the Queen's English to help them get jobs. In Essex, this primary school was offering their pupils elocution lessons to change their accents. Again, the rationale behind this, there's a quote there from one of the teachers, is it's about helping the children to speak properly so they can improve their reading and writing and obviously have a better education. Shortly, we're going to interrogate that use of the word obviously, because I'm not sure this link between speech and reading and writing is necessarily so obvious, so we'll come back to that. We've got this example in the West Midlands, where teachers said that this zero tolerance policy had been introduced because the regional phrases were damaging to pupils. So again, like the Teesside school, they sent this letter home to parents with a list of items from the local dialect that children were no longer allowed to use in school. And again, they're asking parents to crack down in the same way at home and stamp out these features. Here's an example from a school in London. School was said to be banning urban slang words. So we've got quite wide regional coverage within England for these kinds of initiatives from schools. It's also worth pointing out that while my first example went back to 2013, there were similar reports in 2019 too. So we had a school local, fairly local to the university over in Bradford, who, amongst other things, banned the use of the discourse marker like. And again, with the same kind of rationale, this was about helping pupils to improve their literacy. So what I want to do now is think about all of those school initiatives and the related news stories and query, well, what kinds of assumptions about language underpin all of these? First, I think the first assumption is that there's a straightforward relationship between speech and writing. So there's this idea that if we want to improve pupils' writing, which of course we do, then we have to change the way they speak. So we need to get rid of bits of their local dialect in order to introduce them to standard English in their writing. Second, there's the idea that non-standard or dialect grammar is incorrect, or in some sense substandard. So that word incorrect or words like damaging were used on some of those letters. The third assumption is that children cannot style shift. And what I mean by this is there seems to be an assumption here that children cannot use both their local dialect and standard English and shift between these different forms and dialects depending on the context and who they're talking to and so forth. So related to that is the idea then that if we want children to learn standard English, we have to first get rid of the local dialect, that we have to erase the local dialect and replace it with standard English. So these initiatives to ban the use of local dialect, I would say, are all well-intentioned. So I don't intend here at all to critique any of the individual teachers and head teachers involved. These teachers are completely invested in improving their children's education and their lives. And that's where these initiatives come from. It's those intentions. However, what I will argue today is that the values and assumptions underpinning these initiatives are misguided and also potentially damaging to the children involved. So in order to start interrogating these assumptions, I'm going to go back to the Teesside story, because that was of particular interest to me, because I happen to be from Teesside, and I'm someone who uses all 11 of these so-called problem features at least some of the time. I've also conducted research on children's language in this area, so as such, I was especially infuriated by the inaccuracies and flawed assumptions evident in the head teacher's letter to parents and in the media reporting of it, and I was troubled by the potential damage this might cause to the young working class children involved. Now, before we start to think again about those assumptions, just have a look now at the letter that was sent home to parents and consider the dialect features that are being banned here, because actually a lot of these are not specific to Teesside. Several of them are common in dialects of English right throughout the UK, actually some of them right throughout the English-speaking world. So you might recognise some of these. I'll just pause for a moment to let you have a look. So with this letter and these dialect features in mind, let's go back to those assumptions. So is there really a straightforward relationship between speech and writing? Well, this letter sent home to parents seems to assume that there is. And in particular, it reveals some erroneous assumptions regarding the relationship between modern pronunciation and standard English spelling. So the head teacher objects to the typical Teesside pronunciations of words such as work and shirt, which Teesside are commonly pronounced with a more fronted vowel sound. So you tend to hear things like work and shirt rather than work and shirt. So we get the kind of vowel sound in these words that you would hear in a word like square. You get the air sound, so you get work, shirt, and things like nurse, burger for nurse and burger. So this is a typical Teesside pronunciation. Linguists refer to this as the nurse square merger because you get a merger between the vowels in these two sounds. And it's common not just in Teesside, it's a phenomenon in Liverpool English too. Now, we don't actually need to get into all the technicalities of that here. You might do a little bit of this as part of your degree, but the important point for us right now is that the head teacher's objection to this particular pronunciation in Teesside appears to be based on the assumption that standard English spelling is based on received pronunciation. That's the modern pronunciation of upper middle class people from the south of England. So that's the kind of accent that we associate with newsreaders, for example. And that assumption leads them to suggest, I think, that it's necessary for children in Teesside to model this pronunciation if they're to learn how to read and write successfully. But that assumption is flawed because actually our spelling system isn't based on the modern pronunciation of any accent of English today. English spelling made sense for the pronunciation of educated people about 600 years ago. So that's why these quirks, like there being a K in knee and a GH in night, these spellings were standardised in the 1400s, but pronunciations have continued to evolve, which means that the standard English spelling system does not correspond directly to any modern accent. The way children in Teesside pronounce words such as work and shirt is no more of a problem to spelling these words than is the way children elsewhere pronounce them. And to follow up with that, we'll include these other words or pronunciations that were being banned too, letter and butter. Now, RP speakers do not pronounce the R sound in words like letter, or indeed in a word like work. So you get letter, work. You don't get letter, work. Teesside English, we don't pronounce the R either. That's because these accents are not rhotic. Some accents of British English are rhotic, and all I mean by rhotic is these are accents where speakers do still pronounce the R. So we get this in some accents in parts of the northwest of England and also in the southwest. Think of Cornwall, for example. We also get this in Scotland. So someone would say letter with the at the end. Varieties of American and Irish English are also rhotic. Now then, does that mean that speakers in America and speakers in the southwest of England are more likely to be able to spell words like work and letter correctly? Well, no, it doesn't. That's because the relationship between spelling and pronunciation is different in all of the different geographical contexts. And to teach children to spell, teachers need to explain the relationship between the child's own pronunciation and the spelling system. The letter sent home to parents in Teesside doesn't shed any light on this relationship, and therefore it's not going to do anything to further these children's education or indeed their career prospects. Moving on now to this idea that non-standard grammar is somehow incorrect or substandard. And let's look at one particular example. So the letter sent home to Teesside parents warns against the use of yous, giving the explanation that you is never plural. Now, first of all, this information is misleading because in standard English, you is the pronominal form used for both second person singular and plural. So teachers no doubt use you for plural address on numerous occasions throughout the school day. So if a teacher was to say, can you stand up and form a line? They're using you plural, they're addressing the whole class there. In fact, historically, you was the plural form while thou was singular. And many languages still differentiate between second person singular and plural in this way. So if you've learned French, for example, you'll know that you need to differentiate between tu and vous. We used to have this in English with thou and you. We don't have that distinction anymore. But many dialects of England, including Teesside, but also Newcastle and Liverpool, also Irish English, various dialects within Scotland, such as Glaswegian, they use yous to fill this gap. And you get this kind of thing going on in US English as well, where they have forms like y'all to indicate you, plural. So anyway, yous in Teesside is simply part of a wider global tendency to innovate within the pronominal system. It usefully fills a gap within the standard English grammar, making clear the distinction between singular and plural address in speech. And it also actually appears much more polite, I think, than Sacred Heart's suggested alternative. So that's the school involved here. They say, instead of saying yous, you can say you lot, as in you lot come here. So this example is just one amongst many that can show us that non-standard varieties like Teesside English have a grammatical system that is just as logical, coherent and rule-governed as standard English. These varieties are simply different from, but equal to standard English. Now, this was the position articulated by quite a famous sociolinguist called William Labov when he was defending African-American vernacular English in the US. And then it was later taken up by the British sociolinguist Peter Trudgill when he was defending regional varieties of British English. But is that entirely true, though? Now, linguists like Labov and Trudgill, like me, may be able to prove objectively that non-standard varieties of English are linguistically equal to standard English, but teachers, parents, pupils, you and I know very well that these varieties are not socially equal. As the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu pointed out some time ago, this means then that arguments about the relative value of different languages cannot be settled in linguistic terms. So standard English, in other words, may be no better than other varieties linguistically speaking, but we know that it's the variety spoken by those in positions of power in the UK, and therefore it has social prestige. And this, of course, is why all pupils need to be able to use standard English, especially in their writing. But the question is then, is it possible for children to do both? That is, can children speak both in their local dialect and in standard English? Can they style shift between these two varieties? That's the next assumption we want to interrogate. And to do that, let's look at a different feature that the Teesside School had objected to. Now, gizzit, as in gizzit ear, is a condensed form of give us it. So it's just a normal process in informal speech that when talk speeds up, some sounds get left out. So we go from give us it to giz it. Now, give us it is considered non-standard because here we've got the use of us for the first person object singular pronoun, where standard English would have me, give me it. And that's the suggested alternative from the school. Now then, why would a speaker choose to use us rather than me? Why would someone say give us it and not give me it? To answer this question, I'm going to share with you a short piece of recorded interaction that's taken from a research project that I conducted in a school in Teesside. And as part of this project, I recorded the children's language using radio microphones, which picked up their interactions right throughout the school day, so in the classroom, but also in the playground too. And the very short clip I'm going to share with you was recorded when 9-year-old Claire was wearing the radio microphone during the lunchtime break. So Claire goes into the playground and she sees the other girls who are playing a game that involves stealing each other's shoes. So these are the kinds of games that 9-year-olds play, I guess, in the playground. Claire approaches the girls because she really wants to be able to join in with this group and with the game, but they then steal her shoe and she has to make a series of requests to get it back. In doing so, she consistently uses singular us, give us it, give us my shoe back. So you should be able to see now the transcript on screen. I'm also going to play the recording for you. Just to say before I do that, the names that you can see in the transcript on screen are not the real names, they're pseudonyms. And so they're different to the names you hear in the recording. Also where there's kind of a long period where we've just got running around and things indicated in the transcript, I've edited that out of the clip in the interest of brevity. So I'm going to play that for you now.
We got a boot. She's got mash. Give us a happy Give us a Georgia. Georgia, give us a It'll be space. Jessica, come get it. We've got one. I bet you may as well give us the other one. Lay it down on the floor. Yeah, lay down. I'll my shoe back.
Okay, so Claire finds herself here in a bit difficult situation. So this recording was made on a wet November day, and she's got one bare foot because one of her shoes has been taken by some of the other girls, and she's kind of having to half hop around the playground to keep that foot dry. Now, though it's a difficult situation, it's not unique. So a lot of the other girls have also fallen victim to this game. And actually, Claire's initial response is quite positive, even jovial. So she laughs through her utterance on line 5. Perhaps she feels quite happy here that she's been included in the fun. But 10 seconds later, when Claire makes a request to get her shoe back on line 15, there's a change to a more serious stance. This time there's no laughter and Claire's intonation is flat. Now, it's not easy to decipher from the recording exactly what happened during this 10-second period in between, but it seems that Claire's shoe was being passed around amidst chanting and that Claire was being positioned by her peers as a non-participant. So they're kind of chanting, Claire's shoe, Claire's shoe, Claire's shoe. Now, we might reasonably assume that this was frustrating for Claire, perhaps also that her foot had started to get cold. So it appears then that by line 15, Claire is no longer a willing participant sharing in the fun. When she makes a second request to retrieve the shoe on line 21, the stress on give, the lengthened vowel sound in it, and the final hyperarticulated T, so she says it with that hyperarticulation at the end, all of this indexes her sense of building frustration. She wants to get her shoe back, and she's got available to her a range of options for formulating a request, including the standard direct imperative, give me it. Now, Claire used this kind of imperative with standard me on a number of other occasions. There are some examples there on screen now. So it's not that Claire couldn't use standard form. These are the examples you can see on screen of examples that she used in other situations. So she could just have said, give me it, give me my shoe back. Actually, she could have said, can I have my shoe back? I need my shoe back. There are lots of different ways of formulating a request. So why here does she choose to use singular us, give us it, give us my shoe back? Well, it's significant in this episode that the other girls position Claire as outside of their group, as a target rather than a participant in the fun. Claire's use of singular us may then be an attempt to appeal to some sense of group support or solidarity in response to her exclusion. And these social meanings associated with that form may derive, at least in part, from the fact that it's a salient feature of the local dialect, enough to have made it into that list of the school's banned items, certainly. In addition, the important role of pronouns more generally in negotiating relationships of solidarity and power has been well documented in a variety of languages historically. So just with that brief analysis of a very small piece of interaction in mind, we're going to go back to those last two assumptions. Can children style shift? Can they use both their local dialect and standard English? Well, absolutely yes. All children have the ability to do this. And actually, rather than thinking of standard English and Teesside English as being two discrete, separate varieties, it's much more productive to think instead about speakers having a repertoire of linguistic resources. And this repertoire includes both standard and non-standard forms. Just like Claire, speakers are able to choose from these forms depending on the demands of the interactional moment. So what are my goals right now? Who am I talking to? What's the context? Using all of those factors, I'm going to select the most appropriate resource. In Claire's case, she selected singular us on that occasion. On another occasion, she might have used me. Does learning standard English require erasure of the local dialect then? Well, absolutely no. So it's much more productive to think about extending children's repertoires, adding to them rather than taking away. So back to those assumptions then. We've shown systematically that the assumptions about language that underpin the move to ban local dialect in schools are flawed. And this raises some questions. If children can command both standard and non-standard dialect forms, why try to ban local dialect at school? Is such a ban likely to work? especially if some of those forms are actually really useful to children in interaction. And what impact might overt corrections of local dialect forms have on children? Now, we haven't got time to answer those questions now, but I'm going to leave them with you and hope that we might get a chance to talk about them together during your degree here at Leeds. Thank you.